Just get this up to the full screen. Okay, there we go. Go back one. Okay, there we go. All right, first of all, it is really wonderful to be standing up here. I'm about to talk about a subject that I have thought quite a bit about. And so the title, there's actually quite, first of all, my name is Lynn, and the title has a lot going on in it, and I just wanted to break that down. Contextualizing Prejudice, a Teaching Approach to Middle School History. We might ask questions about like what is contextualizing, what is contextualization, why should we contextualize prejudice? But I'm going to go ahead and start with the context that I was teaching in, which is a middle school classroom, specifically 6th grade Ancient Civilizations class in the East Bay. I was not the full-time teacher in this class. I was a guest teacher. I taught a lesson there that lasted for 1 week. And what I was doing in that lesson was I was contextualizing what prejudice looked like in the ancient Han Dynasty in ancient China. The class itself, it was as diverse as you would expect an East Bay class to be. 35 students, many of them from all across the world, 10 English language learners, some of whom spoke Arabic as well as Chinese and Vietnamese and of course Spanish. So that's the very general context that I was teaching in during that week. And I'm pressing the space bar. It's supposed to go, right?
Yeah, it got 50.
Oh, my apologies. Okay. So before getting into contextualization, why should we examine prejudice in the context of ancient civilizations anyways? I think most people, or I know from talking with many teachers, that they think about teaching prejudice more in American history. And I think that there are some real benefits to talking about prejudice in ancient civilizations. And if you'll excuse me, I need to grab my water. One of those benefits just has to do with the developmental stage that 6th graders or 12-year-olds are at. You know, 6th graders, they're studying ancient civilizations. 12-year-olds really should be thinking about prejudice, and we shouldn't wait a few more years to really pursue this topic in history. At the age of 12, students are beginning to really perceive much more prejudice, especially students of color are experiencing much more of it than they did. So we should really allow them the chance to start thinking about it. Ancient civilizations presents a kind of unique opportunity to actually compare many different types of prejudices. So what does it look like in ancient Mesopotamia? What does it look like in the Incan civilization? It's always going to be different, and in every single one of those civilizations there are going to be many different prejudices. There's not just going to be one. It's not just something that, you know, an oppressive group of people has. It's kind of a pervasive thing within civilization. So I think the act of comparison really gives students a chance to understand the phenomenon of prejudice, whereas when we get to American history, we have another interesting opportunity to really to track it, to see how it evolves, to see how it changes over time. I also think there's another benefit is that I think the distance of an ancient civilization, even if that could on the surface seem like a reason not to look at the subject, I think it actually is beneficial because prejudice is a very emotionally charged subject, especially in American history. It can be hard sometimes to analyze, you know, a group of people that's being incredibly oppressive. So I think giving students the chance to do that in a more distant way, gain some practice in really learning how to analyze an oppressive situation before getting into the American history context. And the final benefit that I really see to looking at prejudice in ancient civilizations is that it really presents prejudice as a universal phenomenon that kind of exists across time and space in many, many, many different ways. And I think it's important to see it in many ways because it exists in many ways right here in the Bay Area. We live in a very multicultural, diverse society right here. And there are people from all over the world who think about people in many different ways, and we should give students a chance to learn how to analyze that. So moving on into contextualization, which is really the core of the study. What does it mean to contextualize? I'm taking this definition from Sam Weinberg, who is a real powerhouse scholar in the field of historical thinking. So contextualization comes from the Latin contextuare. It means to weave things together. It's the active process of connecting things, connecting the different parts of history. There's always a subject of contextualization. It means we always contextualize something. And what we're contextualizing, in this activity that I put together, the subject of contextualization, of course, is prejudice. So how do we look at how prejudice fits into the whole cloth of history? What are the specific historical influences that are causing it to manifest in a specific way? Aside from a cloth, we can also kind of think of this as a constellation. If prejudice is one dot, what are the other dots that we have to connect it to in order to really understand why it looks the way it does? Perceiving the whole cloth of history. So the bulk of the research, I would say that the vast amount of research on historical thinking and on contextualization has to do with a couple of these skills here, which I'm going to very briefly discuss. These are, I'm taking these from the Stanford History Education Group, which is a really major force in the study of historical thinking. And so they talk a lot about sourcing, close reading, corroboration. And the fourth skill that they talk about is contextualization. I've come to see sourcing, close reading, and corroboration actually as kind of forms of contextualization or means to contextualize. So sourcing, you have to look at the immediate context of the author, what's going on with them. Close reading, you have to look at the rhetoric, what's the audience, how's the rhetoric shaping things. The human element has to do with what are the unconscious assumptions and judgments that are going on in the text. And corroboration has to do with actually taking multiple sources, weaving them together into a context. My question is, what about contextualization for younger students? All the research in this has to do primarily with high school students. It's very high order thinking. So there's less research when it comes to contextualization, historical thinking in 12-year-olds. Something that I do want to mention is the psychological tendency towards presentism is pervasive. Sometimes within the human way that we think of history, and that is we tend as human beings to read the present moment, the way things function in the present moment, into prior moments. So contextualization helps to see things on their own terms rather than reading the present moment into a past one or into a different culture. Perspective, I think that a really good approach to working with 12-year-olds is to focus on perspective recognition. I want to say something about the multiplicity of perspectives. There's been a lot of research, especially in the field of psychology, looking at multicultural education, and unless there's multiplicity of perspectives discussed within any one culture, if a culture is presented homogeneously, it can actually lead students to stereotype the culture rather than to learn about how beautiful and wonderful it is. And of course, this is connected to historical empathy. A long introduction to my project. Did it help students think contextually? This is my research question. How did contextualization help them understand prejudice? The data collected and the methods that I used, one of the main ones was audio recordings, and it was in conjunction with written materials. What I mean by this is that I not only recorded all the dialogue in the classroom, as the students were working on the other forms of data, the journal entries and the character sketches that I made, I was walking around the room, asking them questions about what they were writing, and recording all of that. And oftentimes, students would write something, and if I just spent 10, 15, 30 seconds with them, the amount of information I would get from that brief back and forth dialogue was dramatically richer than just looking at the written word. Got a lot of data from the daily journal entries. The character sketches are what I really want to focus on, and unfortunately I'm not going to have time to read this, but this is an example of one of the primary data sources. I made 4 different character sketches. Each of the character sketches was a character in the Han Dynasty who had a certain prejudice against another group of people. This one is an example of a poor group of people having a prejudice against another poor group, which was something that prior to this lesson the students really didn't think that was like a possibility. There were only 5 out of the 35 students that said that was something that would likely happen. So this is a prejudice of farmers against mountain dwellers. And I would like to go into it more, but I'm going to move on. This is an example of one of the questions that I asked. How did the farmers feel about the mountain dwellers? Why did they feel this way? Why did they have the prejudices that they did? And a typical student response to this was, the farmers hate the mountain dwellers. They hate them because they don't dress like them, live in the same houses as them, and don't eat grain. They also call them animals because of that. Now I'm going to move into my findings. One of the dilemmas that I had with that response was that I really wasn't sure if the students were contextualizing, if they understood why those prejudices existed, or if they were just pulling kind of what I had written from the text. So they were easily able to identify the prejudices, even though they're very foreign. Like, we don't think about not liking someone because they don't eat grain, although that was actually something that existed in many civilizations. Another finding that I had was students really tended to explain prejudice as due to difference. Like, oh, they live differently, so there's going to be a prejudice. That was something that worried me a bit, and I took it as evidence that maybe the lesson, even though they understood it, had perhaps not helped students contextualize as much as I'd hoped to. Comparisons to the present moving forward, I think, are very helpful. Why do we not have that? Why did they? So they can maybe have another mode to think about it. Brief future direction. There wasn't too much research in the specific developmental age that I was looking at. So more research on contextualization at different developmental stages with sample curricula and assessments would be really, really helpful for teachers such as myself who are hoping to write curricula such as this. Finally, I think some of the most innovative stuff that I wrote actually was linking the field of contextualization to the psychology of prejudice. And I think that there's quite a bit of evidence, I think, that contextualization at an earlier age might actually be able to help, not only help students understand prejudice, but alleviate it. That, however, would really be a different presentation to get into the evidence for that. So finally, in closing, I really truly feel like this work has only just begun for me. I feel like I've gained some minor expertise in this subject, but there's so much farther for me to go, and I really hope to be able to do more of this in the near future to help other teachers consider how to contextualize in history. And with that said, just thank you all so much for being my colleagues throughout the past couple years and professors. So thank you.